everyone, Sahili here from the Classcipe Operations. I got Miss Satyan as well from the team who will be moderating this workshop with me. Welcome to Classcipe Expert Exchange Forum 2nd edition. Classcipe is a New Zealand-based company aiming to create a global community for educators and learners to share their knowledge and experiences. With us, you can create your unit plan and tasks more easily and customize your template with accurate content recommendations. Our platform functions includes interactive slides, customized templates, online, offline, and hybrid learning functions, managing classroom, co-teach, instant feedback, and many more. Do follow us on our social media to receive more information and updates. Moving on to the issuance of certificates, the certificate of attendance will be issued to those attending the live session uninterrupted until the end. The feedback form will be sent to the chat box. You need to complete and submit it to get certificates. We take 14 working days to issue certificates. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our workshop facilitator, Mr. Harirajan. Coming to us with rich experience from the heart of Malaysia, Mr. Rajan has dedicated himself to the field of education since 2008. Over a decade, Mr. Rajan has been an integral part of an international school in Penang. His roles are as diverse as they are impressive, including being an experienced teacher of IB MYP Science and IGCSE Chemistry, not to mention his profound contributions to the IBDP program as both a chemistry teacher and an extended essay supervisor. He is also a chemistry IGCSE examiner and an Edexcel IGCSE and A-level examiner, roles that demand a high level of expertise, precision, and integrity. As we proceed with today's workshop, we are privileged to have Mr. Rajan to share his insights and experiences for education with us. So please join me in warmly welcoming Mr. Harirajan to our workshop.
Yeah. All right, thank you, Ms. Ahili. All right, so I'm just going to go on straight to sharing my screen and we'll talk from there.
So, Mr. Rajan, just 1 minute, we'll just give all the attendees 2 minutes in the interactive slide deck. So we'll share the student link here in the chat box. Just give me a moment, I'll just share that. And then Ms. Satyan will allow them one by one to access your slide deck so that they can interact with you through the slide. I request all the attendees to use this link that I'll be sending now in the chat, and please sign into Classcipe platform. Primarily, it will appear that you are blocked. So Ms. Satyan will unblock you one by one. So kindly have your patience and then refresh your page. So please use the link that I sent in the chat now. You will have access to the slides. Okay, I think you can start. And as and when they join, we'll continue unblocking them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right. So hello, everyone. So welcome to the Expert Exchange Forum 2nd edition. So we'll be looking at creating effective summative assessments today. So I'm just going to be sharing my knowledge, and it's going to be a knowledge sharing session. So I'm not exactly the expert, but it's good practice to actually share knowledge among all other educators, see how you guys are doing it. Maybe I can adopt your style, you can adopt mine, and we'll change it so that it benefits students. So this is my second time actually doing something like that with Classcipe. So thank you very much for inviting me again. So there's a little introduction. I think Ms. Sahili mentioned most of it already. So I have been teaching ever since 2008. And I've been at the International School of Penang in Malaysia since 2010. So I've just completed 14 years here. So I actually have taught, or I'm currently teaching Cambridge IGCSE Chemistry and IBDP Chemistry. And I used to teach, we used to offer KS3 curriculum, but now we are transitioning to the MYP. So I have a 1 year 8 class. So I also do MYP Science. And I have been an examiner for Cambridge IGCSE Chemistry. And recently in the last 2 years is Pearson Edexcel IGCSE and AS A-level examiner as well. And within the DP, I've always been a homeroom tutor. So automatically I'm a CAS advisor. And ever since starting in this school, I've always been an extended essay supervisor as well. So again, that's 14 years of extended essays in chemistry. And I do dabble a little bit into world studies as well. Not my focus, but sometimes it depends on the students. And for leisure, I enjoy traveling to explore nature, focusing on hiking and trekking hills. My absolute favorite is volcanoes. So I've done Vesuvius, and the most recent one is Anak Krakatau in Indonesia. All right. So the objective of today's session is understand the principles and importance of summative assessments. So because I teach sciences and chemistry, so if you're not a science teacher at least, maybe it may not be very applicable, but it is good practice, it is good experience to have a look at how you could maybe give me some other inputs from a non-science perspective as well. And second one is to learn to design effective and reliable summative assessments and to discuss common challenges and best practices. So a little introduction on what summative assessment is. I think all of us know this by heart. As students, we've gone through this, some of us more rigidly than others. So I remember when I was schooling back in the 90s and early 2000s, we only had mainly summative, very rigidly summative assessments. So it's a type of evaluation used to measure student learning, knowledge, proficiency, or success at the conclusion of an instructional period, such as unit, course, or program. So it's something done at the end, and whatever we do in between our lessons or at the end of each lesson within the unit, that's all of us know is a formative assessment. So this is something a bit more structured compared to the formative. So these assessments are typically high stakes and are used to assign final grades or determine whether students have achieved the learning objectives, usually what we set the unit objectives to be, and that's the learning objectives. So creating effective summative assessments is crucial for accurately measuring student learning at the end of an instructional unit. So coming from my experience, and it's because of at the end of the 2 years of year 10 and 11, my students take the IGCSE chemistry, and at the end of 2 years of year 12 and 13, they take the IBDP exams. So having summative assessments along the way are very, very important for me and my students. One is maybe to gauge knowledge, but my second one is definitely, I feel is the more important, is to give student exam practice. So I think a lot of students I've noticed who come from a non-summative assessment kind of or rigid summative assessment background tend to find it a bit more stressful when they are put under exam conditions. So just wanted to add on, I know certain slides here, we've got an interactive feature where you can type in your questions, and I would aim to answer them within that slide itself. But again, if you have any other questions, I can't see the chats. I've closed the chat box, so I can only see the number of chats. So please stop me and ask. I'm okay with that. It is a learning process. Okay, so the first one, before I start off with the key strategies to ensure summative assessments are effective. So I think the main focus here is having something that is effective rather than having something that is a bit more generalized. So this is the interactive thing. Before I move on to my key strategies, can you please maybe share what you do to make sure? So in the, maybe you can type it in or voice it out. What do you think for you are key strategies that you use or you adhere by to make sure that your assessments or summative assessments are effective? Maybe about 2 minutes. Okay, so we have graphs there. So very, very MYP. I use graphs in my MYP classes and MYP assessments as well. All right, prepare students in advance. All right, so that's good. That's something we all do as well, especially if we know the students are actually having an exam at the end. Consistent with your formative assessment. Okay, that's a good one, Ms. Omnia. So I think the formative assessment tends to lead towards what you're expected the students to be able to accomplish at the end when they actually have their summative assessment. Right. Anything else? Okay, differentiation. All right.
I would like to say something.
Carry on. Yes.
So I believe that you cannot assess what you have not taught. So
Yes.
to ensure that my summative assessments are effective, I ensure that I teach them the skills and the content, a part of the content through direct instruction or through activities when I'm teaching them in class. So they are better prepared for the summative assessments.
Okay, thank you very much. So yeah, I think that's the nature of all the summative assessments. You can only assess something that has been taught. So it is unfair to the students, definitely. So again, with the curriculum like IGCSE and IBDP, to a certain extent, I would like to add on, it becomes a little easier because you actually have a syllabus. But for the MYP, because you're developing your own curriculum, so I tend to make sure that the assessments are aligned with whatever is being taught lesson by lesson during the whole unit. I think differentiation is something that we can talk about a little later when we come to differentiation, because to a certain extent, IGCSE and IBDP, there's no difference in terms of paper for differentiated students. So what we have there is just accommodation. But within the formative assessment, it is good to actually show some differentiation. So yeah, I like Anita mentioned application-based questions. So I think that's already incorporated within the IGCSE curriculum. We'll be looking at that, and also the DP. All right, so I'm just going to continue. Thank you very, very much for your contributions. I'll take that in mind as well. Okay, so my first one, I think, is to make sure that the summative assessment is aligned with the learning objectives. So at the start of every unit, make sure you've got clearly defined objectives. And usually, and always, sorry, not usually, always your assessments should align with the objectives as well, right? And the outcomes of the course or the unit being taught. And the second one, for it to be aligned with the learning objectives, is the content coverage, is to include a variety of questions that cover all the important content areas taught. So again, the focus is the areas taught. So again, if we have a curriculum like IGCSE and IBDP, whatever is in the curriculum or the syllabus guide or the syllabus content, syllabus statements has to be taught. So I'm just going to show some examples. So for example, this is the generalized one. So in Cambridge IGCSE, you've got the aims of the syllabus itself. So these aims of the syllabus is actually something a bit more generalized for the whole syllabus. So it's regardless of the unit that you're actually teaching. So I, as a teacher, what I do is I tend to link this to my individual learning objectives if I'm covering a certain unit to be specific. So because I want to always, I'm a bit of an OCD, so I always make sure that, so I've got like 6 objectives here. All these 6 objectives need not be attempted within the same unit, but throughout the whole course, it has to be there. So some of it may actually appear more in certain units and less in others, but at the end of the 18 months or the 2-year program, I make sure that all these are actually hit so that I'm actually keeping to the aim of the syllabus itself. And based on this syllabus, obviously, you've got the assessment objectives. So in the IGCSE, you've got 3 assessment objectives with knowledge with understanding, handling information and problem solving, and experimental skills and investigation. So if I were to link this now to my MYP class, technically this only hits, I suppose, 3 of the MYP criteria, which is A, B, and C. To a certain extent, criteria D in MYP, which is impacts of science, is not really into the syllabus at the IGCSE level because it's very rigid. You have to do, for example, they only focus on certain industries in chemistry, but not the local context. For example, like the blast furnace. So in Malaysia, we don't know the blast furnace because it's not an industry here. So it's a bit difficult to get it attained to what a local kind of aspect. But the other 3, for example, knowledge and understanding is criteria A, for example, in MYP as well. All right. And assessment objective 2 and 3 could be a combination of B and C put together. Right. And if you look at the different papers, they tend to actually assess different assessment objectives. So assessment objectives 1 and 2 appears in the extended and the core papers of 1, 2, 3, and 4 on different levels. One will be core, the other one will be extended. And the experimental skills and investigations is paper 5 and 6. So I do understand that this is technically tailored towards so that an English student is proceeding to actually do the AS and A level. So it's catered towards that. But if you were to look at the DP ones, so in chemistry again, you've got 9 learning objectives. And I like this last bit here, which actually aligns with the MYP, for example, criteria D. So develop awareness of the ethical, environmental, economic, cultural, and social impact of science. And all the others would actually align with the MYP criteria of A, B, and C as well. So why is it for me it's challenging? Because I've got this program now in between the MYP and the DP that I need to cater so that my students actually still experience the continuum and also be able to make it to actually understand the DP concept. So with my examples I'll be sharing later on, you'll see that I tend to do IGCSE, I wouldn't say like a full MYP style, but I tend to incorporate a lot of the MYP, or I try to incorporate the MYP components because it's needed for DP as well, right? And in the DP science, we've got this special thing called nature of science, which is not at all done in IGCSE chemistry, right? So nature of science talks about the limitation, evaluating a model or a certain ray of mathematics. And then from the DP aims, you've got the assessment objectives. So you've got, here you have got 4 different objectives, because the DP actually has one criteria, which is I really enjoy. For example, every subject has got at least one coursework. And the arts, for example, is only coursework without a certain exam at the end. So I think it gives the student, the IB student, a more of a holistic approach. So the DP assessments, I would say, is a bit more holistic, because the scientific investigation, which is an IA, an internal assessment, is something that the students come up by themselves. So quite recently, if you're doing AS and A level, a lot of the AS A level programs have also introduced an independent research. But it is not compulsory. It also depends on the schools that are actually running it. So students need not choose to do that independent research, but if the school is offering, students usually do it. But that independent research is very similar to what we call the extended essay in the DP. So it need not be in science, it could be in a different subject. So to a certain extent, I feel that the only scientific investigation an A-level or AS student actually get is the classroom practical, which is very, very important, and also the paper 3 assessment, which is like an alternative to the practical. So here you've got demonstrate knowledge, understand and apply knowledge, analyze, evaluate, and synthesize. So one thing good about DP Sciences is this year is the new curriculum for the year 1 for sciences. So there is a change in papers. So chemistry is having now the database questions and experimental questions part of paper 1, right? Which usually is the options in the options paper. And they've got rid of the options, which now is incorporated throughout the core units as well, right? Moving on, okay? So that's the content in terms of coming up with the aims or abiding or adhering to certain aims of the summative assessment. My second one is definitely important as well, is to have a variety of question types. So I feel that this is where, although with the system quite rigid like Cambridge IGCSE or IBDP having an exam at the end, you show the differentiation. So we always have multiple choice questions or short answer or essay questions and practical tasks. So multiple choice is actually good for assessing knowledge and understanding, and it ensures distractors where wrong answers are plausible. So it is students know that one of the answer is definitely the correct answer. And it actually also trains students, for example, sometimes the easiest way to attempt a multiple choice question is by method of elimination. If it's too challenging, because you always have 2 answers that are very, very close, but it could be very different in terms of language. So one method of actually deducing the correct answer would be to cross out 3 other wrong ones that you know, then the last one left is could be the correct one. And then you've got the short answer or essay, which is usually used to assess higher order thinking and the ability to articulate thoughts clearly. And the last one is the practical tasks for subjects that require practical skills, include performance tasks or projects. So one thing different I would like to note is the Cambridge program that I've conducted is an IGCSE, so it's an International Cambridge Secondary Certificate of Education. So the questions are not marked based on language. So sequencing is important. For example, if you're going to explain a process, sequencing is important. But in terms of language-wise, they're not very particular. But that actually makes it a little easier, especially coming, a lot of my students are English second language. To be honest, I'm English second language as well. Okay, my first language is Malay. So, but the problem comes in later on when the students go to the DP, where it's one paper for the same paper for the whole world. So technically, the answers should be in a very, very understandable language in terms of the content or the answer being put out, and also for it to be able to be understood. So these are the types of questions or methods that I use. for my summative assessment. So again, feedback session, 2 minutes. Can you just drop a simple text of anything different from these that you usually conduct in your lessons or in your summatives? That it will be a good sharing practice for all of us to maybe include further. It need not be specific to science, but it'd be good because the focus is going to be science. I'll give you 2 minutes maybe. Okay, so you got practical tasks. Thanks, Jyoti. Open-ended questions addressing real-life situation. All right, very good. I think that's something a student, technically, I like open-ended questions because you can run it as a project where technically there shouldn't be a right or wrong answer, but highly evidenced. Okay, short answer in Hindi. Okay, thanks, Anita. So this is possibly important for a second language student, right? But I do understand that you want to make the students understand, but just bear in mind, at the end of the day, all answers should be in English. So throughout the whole 2 years, it's good for them to actually get to know the correct terms, for example, used. Open-ended questions, so may explore different angles of the question. Thank you very much. All right. Okay, thank you. So these open-ended questions tend to not appear much in the Cambridge IGCSE, but sometimes it appears as an NOS question, a nature of science question in the IBDP. Okay, Ms. Omnia mentioned, ask students to illustrate their answers with a diagram. Okay, now this is very, very important because to being an examiner, we get this sometimes clues. For example, the answers could be part of a diagram. So for example, if you're doing a paper 6, where some of the answers could be in the label diagram of a practical setup, we should be giving marks for those. So it's positive marking. So it's good for them to actually maybe get practice of maybe drawing a certain setup where the labels are already in there, where they can get marks from. Mustafa mentioned that usually in DP Maths, there's short answer questions, extended questions, reflection, justification. Okay, that's good. Reflections, I think what I do is usually it comes after a unit has completed. Okay, Justice mentioned drill learners to understand the language choice to be able to perform well. Okay, this is very, very good. The language itself. So sometimes a lot of the, especially second language students, tend to misunderstand, for example, certain sentence connectors, of to, okay, or from to, you know. So it's good for them to have a lot of practice on those. Oh, command terms for Ashika. Thank you. So we'll be going through that when we talk about a little bit about Bloom's taxonomy. So command terms are important for students to actually understand what they actually mean, what they want, describe, explain, state, right? Evaluate or analyze. All right, thank you so much for your input. Moving on. Okay, so I think this is a big one that I think us as teachers, we do not have time to do. So validity and reliability. So to make sure that you have content validity is the assessment should cover the content it intends to assess. So we do this all the time. We try our best, okay, to make sure that at least there's one question for each important content in the assessment itself. Construct validity is to ensure the assessment measures the intended construct, such as critical thinking or problem solving. So this could be, this could be something, problem solving or critical thinking, for example, a practical based question. And the last one, so reliability. So the assessment should produce consistent results over time and across different groups of students. So I feel like this is the one that us as teachers, we do not have time to do. I do not have time to actually do a pre-test, post-test, and all those kinds of things that is required for a good summative assessment. So in school, we are a team which I lead. So I lead the chemistry team. So all the assessments is usually made by me, and then I share it with the other teachers, and they give me comments. They give back comments in terms of language and all not. So it's a collaborative kind of thing, or I call it a structured collaboration, because sometimes when we start from scratch collaboration, we get nowhere. So someone starts it, and then we collaborate to actually have their input in it. But the issue comes with, I know some teachers prepare their own questions. So I don't actually prepare my own questions. I strictly follow or take past paper questions. Why? Because past paper questions already have this reliability. They have gone through vetting. So they've gone through a whole process. There is literally a group of chemistry teachers up there in Cambridge or IBO, and that's their whole year's job, is to come up with questions and revise those questions, come up with mark scheme for those questions to make sure that they are actually accustomed to a wider range of students regardless of the language. The second thing, coming from an examiner, so these questions are actually later have answers to these questions. So the first set, so as an examiner, we go through the first stage of examining papers is familiarization. So familiarization is when we get the question, some of the sample questions or answers from students with the mark scheme. So we mark a certain sample, and then later on with the mark scheme, and then from the student's answer or from your knowledge as a teacher itself, you may think, oh, there are more answers that could be for this question or to answer these questions, which the students have done. So we actually input all these possible other answers that could be for this one question. So when you go and download past papers and you download that mark scheme is definitely not the examiner's mark scheme. That is already the mark scheme that has got the input from the examiners. So it's a bit much more bigger mark scheme. So that's why I prefer going through or using only past paper questions, because it already has this reliability. So I don't need to test out if the question is actually applicable to my students or not, because I know it should be applicable, because these are the same styles of questions that it would appear in their final exams. So the only thing that I may change is the values. So I do not change the sentence structure. I do not change the language of the sentence. I only change the value. So for example, like anything that has got to do with calculations, I may change the values because it doesn't disrupt the intent of the question itself. All right. So I know some teachers are really, really hardworking, but honestly, I don't have time to actually come up with my own questions. So I come up with my own worksheets, yes, okay, because that is from the teaching. So my formative could be from my own language or the language students use in class, but my summatives are definitely from past paper questions alone. Right? So, and the other thing is because the language may actually differ, so I only use past papers. So the other thing from past papers is there are very, very good question banks that you can use past papers to get questions from. So again, it's me personally, I had issues with question bank because if I were to say, oh, I want questions from stoichiometry, all right? So it will give me all questions on stoichiometry, but because it's the nature of the subject of chemistry itself, where it's interlinked everywhere, it is very hard later on to go and remove those interlinked questions, because stoichiometry could appear as part of organic chemistry. It could appear as part of energetics, or energetics could appear as part of organic chem, which I've not taught yet. I've only taught energetics, for example. So I literally, at the start of just before every unit, make the summative assessments where I go through each and every question of the past paper and crop the questions where I know it's solely based on the unit that I am teaching. So I feel it's a lot of work, but I feel that I make sure that my questions that I'm giving the students are set to the content that I'm only teaching for that unit. But question bank is a good place to actually start.
Mr. Hari, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have questions in the chat. So one thing from Tenzin asking, can this strategy be applied to M1 and 2 assessments?
Sorry, you mean like MYP, is it?
I think he meant that MYP 1 and 2.
Okay, MYP 1 and 2. So when I do MYP, okay, because I'm in a team with different teachers, so she sets the assessments. So again, the only way we actually mainly do is we try to get the reliability by checking with each other in terms of language, because we tend to do a lot of GRAS assessments for MYP, a lot of project-based assessments for MYP. So we do test out the reliability in terms of only, for example, getting teachers' feedback. So my school, this is only the first year that we've just finished the MYP. So we're going through accreditation. So we do have, so at the end of every unit summative assessment, we actually get together, we actually reflect together on the whole unit together with the assessment. And honestly speaking, sometimes we have thrown out that whole assessment and said, this is not working. But that's the thing about the whole teaching process itself. We need to reflect, we need to actually change, because sometimes what we thought and what we materialize is not what the students actually get, it's not what the students understand, and it's hard for them to actually push through further if the objective again is not met or not reached. But we tend to always align with the content validity and the construct validity. But the reliability bit, like I said, is very challenging, because if you're doing MYP 4 and 5, for example, maybe you can use the past papers from the e-assessment, which again has gone through vetting, which has got but I'm not too sure much about that, because my school is doing only MYP 1, 2, and 3. So that's why the reliability is still with a tiny group of teachers with the students that we have. Hopefully that answers the questions.
Thank you. We have another one. Mr. Allen is asking, nowadays students has access to past papers. How should we solve that issue?
Okay, so I feel that students have access to past papers, yes. So we use past papers as summative assessment questions. So I do not take past papers, questions from a single past paper, for example. And if you're going to do a unit test, you can't, because your unit test is, my unit test is always 40 marks with 60 minutes. So it's 1 hour. So I take it from a range of different papers. So, which I assume most students tend to work backwards when they're practicing in past papers, because even I actually advise students use this site called ExamMate. So I think ExamMate is a good site for students to practice, because they can actually click on the unit of questions and then they basically practice based on units itself. So I make sure that I have a range of questions. But to be honest, no matter how much students practice on a past paper, and I think with subjects like all subjects, I would say, it is not possible for a student to get 100%, because you would have taken, so I've got past papers from example 1999, which are already there in my Google Drive, for example, for DP and also for IGCSE. So I actually take a range. So that's why I think it takes a long time, because I go into each paper, choose the question based on what content it is, and I never use the same paper for following years. So I think that's something as educators, we need to have a bit of, maybe, I wouldn't say integrity, but because papers do get passed on. Students get their papers back. They may have a sibling in a younger year that may be coming into your class later on. So every year, or every unit, I produce papers from scratch all over again. So I feel that makes it a possibility for students to have not seen all the questions yet. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's it for now. You can go to the next slide. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Excuse me?
Sorry. Yes. Hani. Yes.
Sorry. So regarding the question that you said, do you have any strategy to mix besides the years, maybe the topic, so the students cannot predict your questions or the question from the teachers?
Okay, that's a good question. So because we've got so much of access of questions, so it depends on what your school is doing. So my school is doing Cambridge. Sometimes I steal questions from Edexcel GCSE, because the content of IGCSE or GCSE should be the same, because it's one curriculum. It's just taught differently, it's assessed differently. So for example, sometimes I will include some of the Edexcel questions of that unit, the Pearson Edexcel questions of that unit, which I know is part of what I've taught, but the students may not have, but may not, all my students have not, because they always click on Cambridge past paper questions. So the same thing when I do for my DP classes, my chemistry DP, I actually choose A-level, AS level questions from Cambridge or Pearson Edexcel that is suited for the topic that I've just. So it actually, you diversifying it makes it so that students, I suppose it gives that extra challenge as well to students to actually try different style questions for that same content from different examining bodies. Hope that answers your question, Hani. Yes, Ashika.
So I have just added a link on the chat. It is called scywebhop.net. This particular website, you just have to register. It is free. So you get past paper questions for IGCSE, physics, chemistry, and biology. You get multiple choice questions, you get structured questions, and you can actually pick the topic and the board and the year in order to create your questions. And at the same time, you will also get your answers. So you don't have to go search for the marking scheme. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so I think there's a lot of sites. Okay, and I think with the power of the internet right now, what we can get, the students can get as well. So we can't stop that. We try our best to work around it. And that's what I do as a teacher as well, right? Okay, all right. So moving on. So the next one is definitely clear instructions and rubrics. So explicit instructions are important, is to provide clear, concise instructions for each question or task. And the rubrics are very important, detailed rubrics for open-ended questions to ensure consistent and fair grading. And these rubrics need to be shared with the students beforehand. So I'll be showing you later on some of the examples that I've created, gone through what we call the internal vetting through collaboration. Explicit instruction. So it is good to actually, you must make sure the students understand. So for example, the multiple choice questions in Cambridge, you need to make sure that the students need to shade that paper or the answer script, they need to shade it. And then these same students, when they come to DP, you're given another grid where you're not supposed to shade it, you're supposed to mark a cross, right? So some of the students, you need to make sure that these are part of the training that you do within your classroom for summatives as well. So explicit instructions. So if you have questions, for example, in like DP biology, because I taught DP bio aeons ago, where there is a set of essay style questions. You need to make sure the students understand. For example, for HL paper, you need to answer 2 of the 4 questions, not all. Or for SL, you need to answer 1 of the 3 questions, not all. And when they say questions, is the number in the question. You can't answer 1A and then go on and answer 2B. You know, so you have to be specific. And I think this is something that we can do as practice in classes as well, to provide clear instruction. I know it's like drilling them, but I think it's good drilling, or it's positive drilling, because it actually instills in them that, oh, this is what I need to do later on in the final exam. So sorry, in terms of rubrics for IGCSE, there is no rubric whatsoever for sciences, so that's fine. For the DP, for the internal assessment, so I do practice IAs during the whole 2 years itself. So I make sure that I give assessments or IA assessments where students are definitely shared with the rubric, and then students are actually assessed based on the rubric, and feedback and marks are given based on that rubric. And I feel that with MYP, these two becomes even more important, because you are creating your assessments from scratch. You are creating your rubrics from scratch. So again, if you're in a team, make sure the collaboration is there, that every teacher within that team, for example, we have 3 year 8 teachers, all of us sit together before the unit starts, while every week, while the unit is going on, we have feedback, we get feedback, we chat with each other, what's happening in their classes, and at the end of the unit is the most important. And when we're providing, or when we're preparing the assessment, the explicit instructions and rubric needs to make sure that it's understandable for the students. So although MYP has got its set criteria, we always use that criteria and change bits and pieces, maintaining the key terms, the key words, to suit the assessment that we are actually giving the student, right? So if that criteria says outline, so we use the term outline as well, but it will be specific to that assessment. So I think with the MYP, because maybe I'm not, this is my first year, I find it even more challenging than my IGCSE and DP classes, right? So DP classes, the most challenging in terms of rubrics or explicit instructions comes with the internal assessment, to make sure students are hitting all that points, because bear in mind, the internal assessment is not examined, it's actually moderated. So how the consistency between the groups of teachers that are marking the internal assessment in your school is the most important. So there's 2 of us teaching DP chemistry. So whenever we have the practice IAs, after we've marked our own IAs, we actually moderate each other's IAs to make sure again that our marking is consistent. So to be honest, in the last 14 years of doing it, my grades for IAs have not gone down at all, except with the higher tier only dropping by 1 mark. My mid tier and my lower tier always maintains the mark that I have actually given. And I actually think that it is the successfulness of the moderation with my team member as well, to make sure that the IAs are of a certain standard. So to make sure that the IAs are off to that standard that we are marking for the end, we make sure that we do loads of practices IAs within that 18 months itself. So I think this is good. Practice, I know we're talking about summative assessments for students, but I think a lot of it comes from the teachers in, especially if you're in teams, right? Because if you're only one person, then you are the boss, you are the team, whatever you say goes, okay? So if you're only one person, again, maybe it's valid. It's good to have another person, a friend from a different school of the teaching the same subject, give you a heads up, moderate for you. Because I know some of our teachers in my school where they are the only teacher, for example, the language teachers, they tend to actually send their assessments for a different teacher in a different school to actually look through it. So, and I think that's what I like about this exchange forum with Classcipe. It is an exchange forum. You know, after this, we all become friends, we become acquaintances. We can actually bounce ideas off each other. All right, moving on. And this is where the differentiation comes in, to have appropriate difficulty level. So all your summative assessments need to have a balanced difficulty, which include a mix of easy, moderate, and challenging questions to differentiate between levels of students' understanding. And I tend to highlight the Bloom's taxonomy. So now I know there's many versions of Bloom's taxonomy now. They're not even in a pyramid anymore, you know. But I think the key terms tend to still apply for all the different structures of Bloom's taxonomy, okay? And I use Bloom's taxonomy to ensure a range of cognitive skills are tested, from basic recall to higher order thinking. And I think this actually makes up the criteria rubric, for example, in the MYP as well. And it also makes up all the assessment objectives, I would say, in even IGCSE and DP level. So the creating bit, the last three, analyzing, evaluating, and creating, for example, in Cambridge IGCSE, we tend to see this mainly in paper 4 style questions and paper 6. And the remembering, understanding, and applying appears throughout. Okay, so having a range of questions, make sure that, okay, because honestly speaking, any examination results, I feel mathematically it should follow a population curve. So that means a bell chart, a bell curve, with most of your students actually getting somewhere within the median, and then you've got some students having more than the median and some actually having less than the median. So maybe that should be a different session on using data for giving input on assessments. But my thing, what I do is, when I make the assessment, I make sure that I'm having questions from each and every part of the Bloom's taxonomy, looking at the key terms for each question. At the end of the assessment, I actually evaluate based on how each student has done in each question or each group of questions that make up the criteria or certain skills from the Bloom's taxonomy. So, and in general, I do tend to plot a graph to see if my assessment is kind of valid. So the one way to test the validity of the assessment is to make sure that you've got a range of results, with the majority being in the median region of the bell-shaped curve. And I do that at the end of every summative. So if I notice that, especially a summative that is actually under test conditions, because I feel that if it's a summative under project-based or practical, which is based on a certain rubric, I give the marks or based on the criteria, the descriptor of the rubric. So I don't really graph that. So I sometimes for an internal assessment or practical work, a lot of students may do badly, a lot of students may do well. It just means that these are some of the skills that I need. So again, it is still data that I'm using to improve on my teaching, on what kind of science skills that I need to focus on because this is not what my students are getting through. But if it's a test-based kind of summative assessment, I kind of usually see a kind of a bell-shaped curve, right? So, and then you can compare throughout the year. That bell shape could actually move within the percentages. That will give you a second input on which topics or which units that your students need more focus on for the summer homework, for example. So using data, I think, is a good way of actually pushing or incorporating into our teaching, into how we change our teaching or change the methods that we use or kind of resources that we share with our students. So, for example, and I think this has happened throughout the whole 14 to 16 years I've been teaching, in IGCSE syllabus, the stoichiometry unit seems to be the one where I get the bell shape really shifted towards the lower end, where the median of my class is the one, like, for example, getting C's. You get only one or two students getting the D or A star. But so that means stoichiometry is one unit that I need to, for example, go over and over again when I'm doing all those other units and try to incorporate stoichiometry here and there. So it actually kind of inputs on how I should be teaching further on from that unit, right? So if it's a unit that you feel that, a lot of students did well, still a bell-shaped curve, but it's skewed towards the more of the merit or the distinction. The median lies within the B or the A. That means, and if you've made sure that your questions or your test paper has all these skills involved, different difficulties put together, then you're very, very sure that your test paper is reliable, it's valid, and the bell-shaped curve shows a skew towards the good end of it. That means the student understand that unit thoroughly, okay? But again, if you have only easy questions, that means your bell-shaped curve again will be skewed towards the positive end. That can also give you information that the questions were not varied. So maybe have use all these data and throughout the years, you'll get better at actually analyzing the data that right now you just can input it into the Google Sheets or Excel. It plots a curve for you, you can see. And that's what I use to actually evaluate my own teaching. And then I compare it with the second teacher. How is my teaching different or how is my results different from hers? Then is that kind of an input on how we are teaching differently? What are we doing differently? So again, it actually promotes collaboration among us staff. Sorry. All right. Moving on. Next one is to make sure there is fairness and accessibility. So bias-free. So to avoid language or content that could be biased against any group of students. And this one, especially, for example, using very high-end words when it's not necessary if you were to actually produce your own summative assessments from scratch. So the language needs to be understandable by all ranges of language users, and to make sure that ESL students are also have the equal opportunity to understand the question, to answer the question, and to do well in the summative, because we are not kind of singling student out based on language. In sciences, it's not a language course, so it's definitely based on the knowledge, it's definitely on the application. And that also goes with us as teachers marking students' work. So if you feel that the language is not something, it's very, very basic, it's okay. Because IGCSE in sciences, we are not marked based on the language. If a student doesn't want to write it in a paragraph form, for example, the design question in paper 6, fine, I get my students to write it in bullet points, a certain method. It's okay because I'm not gauging their language. Second one here is accommodations. So provide necessary accommodations for students with disabilities to ensure an equitable assessment experience. So this one I highly do in my school. So we've got a learning support teacher. So she gives us input of learning support needs of all classes or certain year. And I always, at the start of the year, I make sure I check if any one of those students are my students. And because at the end of it, all students sit for the same paper, I don't give them a separate paper. but I do give them specific accommodations. So if the student is requiring an extra 25%, I tell the student, okay, we'll continue the test into lunchtime. You will get your extra 25%. If the student needs a scribe, I make sure that the learning support teacher is free during that time to come into my lesson so that she is actually doing the scribing for the students. If the student needs a dictionary, okay, so I make sure that the students are given with the dictionary, right? So try your best to actually include all these accommodations, because especially if these students are going to be actually having those accommodations in the final exam of GP or IGCSE itself. Again, it's practice for them, is to let them know that what we're doing as a summative in classes is what you'll be doing exactly at the end. All right, so this is another feedback session. If you have any other ways you make sure that you give accommodations that I could actually steal from, it'd be good to know. Excuse me. So Justice asked here, some units or topics tend to be underperformed by the learners like organic chemistry. So what do you do in such scenario? So the way I've planned my lessons, organic chemistry is the last unit that we do. And how I see it, organic chemistry is the consolidation of all the physical and inorganic chemistry that we've done previously. Because organic chemistry, you have specific organic compounds, specific reactions. That means, first and foremost, organic chemistry is one good unit when you test to actually test all other units application. Can a student write a balanced equation when you have an organic compounds reaction? So if the student, so I find that as a good consolidation. So because I do it kind of at the end, I do notice that when I have a summative for that, students tend to do badly in certain specific topics. So organic chemistry summative assessment is a little different for me, because a lot of times the things that students do badly in an organic chem assessment need not be organic chemistry itself. The content could be an energetics one, could be a redox one. So it takes time. I do understand it takes time, but I do go through, especially the students on the lower end, to make sure that their concern is actually, is it organic chemistry? Are we talking about how to draw structures? Or are we talking about writing a balanced equation of alkane and chlorine, for example? So what do I do in such scenarios is I tend to have a retest. So some of these students, again, the retest is something I do out of students who want to do it, but not all students may want to do it. Okay. So I tend to do a retest after I've gone through each and every questions and given feedback. So Hani asked, after creating a set of questions, I will ask my peer to do and check the questions, and then we exchange and discuss any feedback. So that's good. So that's to make sure that your questions are bias-free and it's not targeting only a certain audience. It's make sure that it's actually throughout. So thank you very much for your input, Hani. And hopefully I've answered your question, Justice. I don't know, because honestly, I feel that I do organic chemistry towards the end of year 11. So a lot of my students don't really struggle with organic chem, but within organic chem, they tend to do struggle with the concept of bonding. So that's when I know, okay, I need to review bonding again. But in terms of organic chem, maybe they do struggle in something that is quite straightforward, the fractional distillation. Okay, sorry, Nilofer, sorry, did you raise your hand? Did you have a question?
Yes, sir. So actually, this
Yes,
was
yes.
regarding the chemistry part. So
Okay,
recently, I
yes.
was teaching IGCSE chemistry as well. So in
Okay.
that, we found that the students find the mole concept a bit difficult. So how do
Very
you
true,
work
yes.
around it when they find it difficult? Or whereas, say, in physics, when we have speed and time, they do it very well. But measurements, when it is milli, micro, kilometer, conversion, decibel, and all, which are so
Yes.
straightforward that you just need to learn them. But then
Yes.
still, a couple of the kids struggle with that. So how
Yes.
do we cope up with
Okay,
it?
so one good thing to do is maybe have a chat with the maths teacher of that year level. So sometimes I do that because, okay, coming from a chemistry perspective, it's not rocket science. The maths used in stoichiometry is not hard. Its application of maths is basic addition, subtraction. So it's basic arithmetic. So when I find that students are hard to apply the maths itself, but the first thing is whenever a student starts the unit of stoichiometry, they already have at the back of their mind, I hate maths, I'm bad at maths, I'm going to be bad at this. So the first step is to maybe clear those doubts. I always tell the students, this is not maths, it's an application of maths, it's not calculus, it's arithmetic. So doing a lot of practice is actually good because practice kinds of makes perfect. So the only thing the student needs to remember in stoichiometry is definitely the formulas, the mole formulas, mole calculation. So it's good to also sometimes I have a chat with some of these the maths teachers to make sure that because I do know that some of these students could be on the lower end of the math sets or the higher end. So I feel sometimes with mathematics, it does boil down to the confidence of the students because they always have this impression that mathematics is the hardest subject in the world. And anything that uses maths is going to be hard, which makes the physics and chemistry a bit more of a challenge to teach and for students to actually do well, just for the fact that because they feel that they're bad at math. So I think as teachers, we need to actually give them this confidence. So I always tell them, it's simple maths, it's arithmetic, it's the application of mathematics. Then I'm not teaching you any new maths concepts. So they tend to feel better after that. Then comes the question with the language. So I think
Yes,
stoichiometry
exactly.
uses,
I was coming to
yeah.
that on language.
So stoichiometry uses kind of some of the questions could be a bit lengthy. So students don't know what am I supposed to do with those values. So I usually give them like a trick, for example. So I tell them because the formulas are meant to be memorized at IGCSE, the first thing when you get any assessment paper for chemistry, you write down that 3 triangles, one for gases, one for solutions, and one for the solids. Right? Make sure you write down, you have to memorize it just before the exam. And when you get that paper, you write down that 3 triangles and you make sure what those unknowns actually mean. So once those 3 triangles are there and you know what they mean, when you look at the question, you circle out the values those questions are actually giving to you. And from those values, you evaluate, is this concentration and volume? If I'm given concentration and volume, look back at my triangle. Which of those triangle actually has C and V, concentration and volume? So that means I know I'm required to calculate moles. So I use the solution triangle, right? If I'm given only volume and the balance equation gives the states as G as gas, oh, if it's only volume and it's only gases, I need to use the gas triangle. So students need to be, again, this comes with practice within the lesson time itself. So I think as an educator, I got better at this as I taught this year after year after year. And I kind of gauge from previous years, okay, now I need to change my teaching style. I need to actually go through this a bit more in depth, a bit more thoroughly. I need to attack the questions in terms of the language rather than the maths, you know? And what is challenging is every year is a different group of students. So you see yourself adding on more things to your teaching, but in the hopes, like now after 14 to 16 years, in the hopes that it's a bit more holistic, that it's a bit more targeted, and you do get better at it. And students do appreciate that time you put in to actually go through with them. And I think this is where your formative assessments play the biggest crucial part to make sure that students are understanding. So I usually have like a simple exit ticket, right? So at the end of every lesson, a simple exit ticket, students answer a series of questions. And then at the end of my day, I go through those questions and then I tweak my next lesson so that, excuse me again, I tweak my next lesson if I need to include something from the previous lesson. So I think the formative assessment does inform us on a day-to-day, on a lesson-to-lesson basis on how our students are faring so that we need to make sure that we are giving them the best. So I already have a plan of each and every unit broken up into each and every lesson, and there's a slide for each lesson. And I share my slides for each lesson. So that actually gives the students to actually use that slide at home. So I know some teachers tend to have a chunk of slides for the whole unit. I found personally, again, it's not your end, personally, I felt this a bit too cluttered. And my students didn't understand which part of those 40 odd slides are we doing today or did we do yesterday. So what I've done is I've broken up each and every slide, that big chunk of slides into each day, right, or each lesson. So students know that, okay, this is the slide Mr. Hari shared today. This is what we did in class. So tonight when I go back, maybe I need to review this slide, you know? And at the end, in every of my slide, I make sure I've got the objective, I've got the content. Every slide is finished up with a series of questions. So within each one, and that series of questions is something that I don't do in lesson. I tell the students, okay, that's your practice. So I tend to give students a bit more of it's on their own responsibility. So every year I actually tell them, you're old enough, the education is your responsibility. So I'm a bit of a chill teacher. I do not give homework at all. Okay. So, and students, I feel, personally, I don't see the value of homework, because I feel that we need to again kind of encourage them towards adulthood, where at university there may not be homework, at our GP level there may not be homework. So what I give the students is actually practice work. I tell them this is something you do in lessons. If you've not completed it, you've created homework for yourself. And students tend to actually love that, because they've got extra questions that they can do at home. All right, thank you so much for all your feedback here. Reflection submitted at the end. Okay, so reflections are good. So reflections is something that I really, really value, because it gives feedback in terms of the assessment and the unit. So in terms of reflection, what I usually do is I do not get students to reflect on the assessment. I get students to reflect on the unit being taught. And the and the assessment becomes an indicator of the unit. So sometimes I feel when I first started off teaching and I got students to reflect on a summative assessment, they literally reflected on grades, not on understanding, on literal grades. Oh, I got a 54%, which is a C, blah, blah, blah. Excuse me for a moment. But later on, I changed my style into getting students to actually reflect on the unit, using their summative as an indicator how they thought the unit fared. Because I feel when students used to reflect on the summative, it didn't give me any input on how they're reflecting on my teaching. So, but when I got them to reflect on the unit itself, there was input on how some parts of my teaching could be improved and some were good that I continue. Right? Okay. Anna Marie mentioned a checklist is good. A checklist is important. Students can use that checklist to how they've understood the topic. So that's, I think, a good one. If sometimes I know teachers in my school, they give the checklist to the student. So students actually go through that checklist, tick off, and all those kind of things. Oh, I'm sorry. This session is running much later than I experienced. Okay. All right. So this is where the actionable feedback. Sorry. So feedback and improvement. So we always provide detailed feedback to students to help them understand their strengths and areas for improvement. And again, we mentioned about the reflective practice. So use the assessment data to reflect on and improve the teaching practices and for future assessment. So maybe we need to go a little bit faster. So I just want to show my example. So my school uses ManageBack. So this was picked up from my ManageBack. One is for the IGCSE feedback and one is for the IBDP feedback. I literally have these on the assessment. What was done well? So the feedback that we give on the students on ManageBack is basically solely on the summative assessment. So I literally tell the students what was done well within your summative and what needs improvement. So a lot of teachers feel that this is very, very time consuming. I do understand it's very time consuming, but if you notice the sentences that I've written there is literally picked up from the syllabus statement. So this is where I get students to understand the language that is in the guide as well, in the syllabus statement as well. That these are the important bits that you have been tested on, which is actually from the syllabus statement. Okay. And this can later on be for them easier language or language they need to know, that they later on go back to their notes or go back to my slides, because some of these terms, some of these sentences and statements are what I use at the start of my slides. I actually put down the objective, which is literally picked up from the subject guide. So I try to maintain this consistency so that students are aware that I am actually using the subject guide and I've gone through the subject guide and I know what I'm doing from the subject guide. So you could be doing it in a different matter. Again, if it works for you, it's fine. Carry on the good job that you're doing. But this is just examples of what I do. But on the assessment itself, So I'm just going to carry on to show you some of the sample examples of summative assessments. Sorry, Miss Sahili, are the students able to open up these things?
Those who have entered your class, they can. Otherwise, I'm sharing the link in the Zoom chat as well.
Okay. So, okay. So, I'm unable to click the link, right?
You can click the link. There is a new clip option below your screen. Just check next to browse your website towards right.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yes, it has the link. See,
it has all the links. It has all the links. You can go to the document.
Oh, okay. So it's on the document. Sorry. Okay.
Yes.
Those are the
Okay.
tips. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to share with you, and you can look through it yourself as well. Okay. So this is the summative assessment in terms of end of unit test. So I make sure the unit here is periodic table and metals put together as a 2-unit assessment, because I feel that when you're able to link link topics so that it makes a better understanding, go ahead and do that. Okay, so I always link periodic table and metals together. I always take out redox from chemical reactions and do redox together with electrochemistry, because I feel redox is needed to understand electrochemistry. It's not needed to understand chemical reactions as a unit per se. Okay, so tweak the syllabus. It's your class. You are the professional doing it. All right. So because each period that I have is 60 minutes, so I make sure that the maximum marks is 40 marks. It's about 1.5 minutes each question, so it gives students enough time. If the student has got an accommodation, they get an extra 25%, which is an extra 15 minutes. Okay, and I make sure that I have questions from paper 2, 4, and 6 in every summative. So these are some of the questions, right? So that's paper 2. And then I've got paper 4 questions. So paper 4 question is where you need to look at the key terms, all right? So sometimes I like drawing questions. I put in labeling questions. So here you've got the blast furnace, all right, which is something they need to remember. And then I like the higher order thinking questions that appears here, explanation, explain why, for example. Okay, so I make sure that it is a series according to the Bloom's taxonomy. And then this one is basically picking out its application questions. So noble gases, they need to apply the periodic table. And I always love putting a design question at the end. So this is when I make sure I know I'm hitting the last 3 tiers of higher order thinking from Bloom's taxonomy, where in paper 6, students need to actually, one question is to design an investigation, right? So I feel that this is good, and it gives me a chance to make sure that the student goes through all 3 different papers and different level of questions. But bear in mind, for some units that you do, they may not be a paper 6. That's fine. For example, when I did atomic structure or bonding, mainly atomic structure, it's all very theoretical, right? So there isn't a paper 6 question atomic structure. So that's fine. Don't have paper 6, but you can still have a 40-mark paper or paper 2 and 4. And I always make it a point to follow like the actual paper. At the end of every summative, even though they don't need a periodic table is given to them, which is picked up from a past paper, which is the same as the syllabus statement. Okay, so you can go through this in your own time. This is just my example. I just wanted to share this. Now, I know in Cambridge IGCSE, there isn't a requirement for practicals, lab report writing. I make lab report writing as some of my summatives. So what I've done is I've created a rubric with collaboration with other teachers. And I felt that this was an important step because my students' next pathway is the DP. And the DP has got internal assessments, which are them requiring them to write a lab report. So from the DP criteria, I actually kind of dumbed it down, made it a bit more IGCSE level. And so these are the prompts that I've given them. So they need to have a research question, they need to list down their variables, apparatus and materials. They need to have a method. I've given marks based on the rubric of different levels of what the students can do, what they need in the data table, the graph, how they presented the graph. I've given them an example, and then you've got a conclusion, and then you've got evaluation. So although it's not needed for my students at year 10 and 11 at GCSE, but I feel it's a good that I introduce it to them, because this is what they'll be looking at DP level. So depending on the program in your school, maybe it's wise to bring it back to previous levels. So you're making sure you're having that clear vertical articulation. So if your school does IGCSE, like in my school, when we plan an MYP unit and everything, we are making sure that the MYP unit is able to feed into the GCSE program. And the GCSE units need to be able to feed into the DP program. So you need to make sure that the students have that consistency, and it's not your fault that you didn't create that consistency. So in terms of feedback, I've shared one of my students' lab report, and I have given some feedback based on, so we did a chromatography practical. So before that, maybe I should share the practical. So I created this sheet. So we've got a practical sheet itself. So I've got the introduction, I've got the aim, I've given them the apparatus and materials. So when they create their own method, their method needs to actually have all these, right? And I've given them a table they can follow. I've given them some literature value of RF values of certain pigments so that they are able to analyze which pigment did they pick out when they were doing their chromatography. And this is an example of a product. So I've actually given feedback here, given a little bit more comments, and this is the students one. They've got the apparatus. Method is theirs. So it could be a method they've actually got from somewhere else, that they tweak it, right? So, and then they've got a label diagram of how the apparatus setup is going to be. They've got the table that I gave them, calculation method. They've got a picture of their chromatogram where they've calculated RF value. And then they've got their conclusion, and then evaluation. I get them to do in a table form with this, right? And excuse me, I always insist that they need to actually list down the work cited, okay? So I think that even though IGCSE doesn't require it, I find it good practice. So my students are a bit more aware, as in when they get the whole IA in DP, it's not like the first time they're seeing it. And we tend to do lab work and lab practical reports in our MYP as well. So we use the GCSE ones, we dumb it down a little bit, we scaffold it more, and so that it gives them an opportunity to actually know what should be expected of them when they come up a bit higher. And the other one I love doing is an ATL task, which sometimes I use as a summative. So I feel ATL tasks, so I now know it's a big push for ATLs to be explicitly taught and also assessed as part of the unit, as part of a summative. So with my IGCSE and the DP especially, the ATLs can be incorporated within those questions. But I love doing something a little extra because I want students at IGCSE to also have the knowledge beyond the syllabus. So I always get students to do presentations. So I created a task sheet. So every couple of units or so, I'll tell the students, oh, okay, we've got an ATL task. So this is your task. You get into groups. And then I make sure there's actually a rubric to the ATL task. So for example, for this task, the student were actually assessed or evaluated on research and communication. And I make sure that the descriptors for each one, the descriptors for each ATL skill is actually specific for the task itself. And this is a student work where for here, they made a presentation. So, and this is good because I actually mentioned it in class. I want minimal words or minimal sentences. Use loads of pictures because that will be able to show your level of communication, right? So this is actually a good one where students just chose pictures and made sure that they could explain the pictures, they could explain the process and what is required of them. And so it's literally all the slides are actually literally pictures, which they have cited at the end. Huge amount of citations. So this group, right? Again, it actually empowers them and it actually encourages collaboration among the students as well, right? So the other one is DP chemistry. Okay, so all of you have access to this as well. So in DP chemistry, so again, the question paper, very similar style. I make sure that, again, questions in paper 1 and 2, it's 40 marks, right? Multiple choice question for paper 1. And then paper 2 style questions, which actually adheres to the whole Bloom's taxonomy as well. and I want to focus on one question like this. So this is an example in DP, for example, an NOS question, nature of science. So a nature of science question gets students to evaluate models. For example, one good question in acids and bases is, why do we use the pH scale rather than the actual H plus concentration? Or they'll ask you to evaluate the Bronsted-Lowry acid theory against the Lewis acid theory. Why are there so many understanding to how we define reduction and oxidation? So I think the DP sciences do this very well, which is not in IGCSE. So I always include one or two NOS questions in all the assessments that I do. So students always already know that what to look out for. So here, this is the hydrogen emission spectrum, energy levels for the hydrogen atom. And it's true, all models have limitations. That's a statement. The students are required to suggest two limitations to this model. So because you're assessing this, now you need to make sure that this is actually part of your lesson as well. You could link it with TOK. Remember, all DP teachers are automatically TOK teachers. So bring in TOK, theory of knowledge, right? So I feel that when I'm doing the NOS part of a certain unit, I'm looking at bringing in TOK. I'm bringing in international mindedness. I'm getting students to think outside the box. I'm getting students to do independent research. So that actually kind of makes up my lesson to make sure and students are aware questions like this may appear, right? So this is a test paper. And then I've created an example of an internal assessment. Again, it's a summative. I've given them the learning goals, a little background. They already have the apparatus. But here, I gave them the procedure because technically, for example, the first few are IA practice. I don't get them to design the whole thing themselves. I want them to focus on, this is the new criteria. So they're focusing on the last three criteria: data analysis, conclusion, and evaluation only. So I give them the method. So I tell them there's no need for background information. Start up with the method, or if you want to do a background, go ahead. I'll give you feedback, but it's not assessed. So you have that kind of freedom with the DP student, but you're still making sure that they're abiding or adhering to certain requirements of the course itself. So this is something I've produced on intermolecular forces. So one of the subunits in the unit of bonding and structure. And I've got an example of a student work here. So you notice that because I've even though it's not part of the evaluation or assessment, I've given them feedback. So what a good research question should be: if you've got the IV, you've got the DV, you don't have at least one control variable. So I do give feedback here and there. Some of it I feel better with the aid of diagram. And then again, all this, you see only comment without a number. That means it's not assessed, but the student did it anyway, so it's good. So this one where you see there's a number, that means these are the assessed ones. So this is an example of, again, a student's work that I've given feedback for each of the three criteria, right? Again, you can look through it in your own time. Again, citations are very, very important. And another one is, again, I do these ATL tasks with my year 12 and 13, maybe not so much in year 13 towards the end, but especially term one. So this one, I've linked a bit of international mindedness, where students were required to research the impact of metals in their own country and regional economy. So if this one, I noticed that I've get students from different nationalities, citizenship. So it's good for them to be able to bring back the unit or the concept being taught to something that is actually dear to them, near and close to them. So here, the assessment is a little different. I told them to create a poster or infographic, but then again, I was assessing on the skill of communication and research. So I've given them the whole rubric on what it is. So an example, and this student is Malaysian. So he or she, I removed the name, I forgot. They did something about tin in Malaysia. So we've got the introduction, what Malaysia has been doing with tin throughout the years, methods of attraction, the effects on national wealth, effects on environmental health, and reason Malaysia has phased out tin, followed by a citation. So I think diversifying the assessment does help in students make meaning of the concepts and units that they've actually gone through, right? And I think it makes the lesson a bit more enjoyable as well. And I think that is it from my sharing. So this is my bibliography, and thank you so much. If there's any questions you have for me, hopefully I'll be able to answer. Any questions at all, or anything you'd like to share in terms of how you run your summatives, which I would really, really like to diversify how I do my summatives as well. So again, it is the sharing platform. You can type it out, or you can raise your hand and just start speaking. It's up to you. I know
We had a thing from Priya. So she asked that she wants to know why different variants for the IGCSE papers are conducted during the course of the course of the year have varying difficulty level.
Okay, the units, yes, have got varying difficulty level. So as a teacher, I think it is good that you do the fundamentals in year 1. That for me is year 10, and to make sure that all those fundamentals will be needed in later on. So if you notice, electrochemistry is unit 4 in the syllabus. I've never done electrochemistry in the first year. It's just too high of a level to do with the newbies. I have rejigged my syllabus to make sure that I'm doing the higher end one, the difficult ones a bit later. So that makes sure, I make sure with that, all my students in year 10, the first year itself, have got the fundamentals to understand much more in-depth. So my year 11 topics is only acids and bases, redox and electrochem, and organic chemistry. All the others, I tend to do in year 10 itself. Hopefully that answers the question.
Sir, we have integrated sciences. So how do we create summative assessments incorporating all the three? Like we have 3 different teachers in each of bio, physics, and chemistry. So when it
sorry, are you doing coordinated sciences?
MYP integrated.
Oh, MYP.
Yeah.
Okay, integrated. Okay, carry on. Yes.
So how do we create summative assessments for them? Like we have like 2 units in for term 1. We have 2 units in physics, 2 units in bio, 2 units in chemistry. So how do we combine them for summative assessments?
Okay, my question to you, are you doing a summative at the end of that 6 units, or are you doing a summative at the end of each unit?
End of each unit in each of the subjects. Yeah.
Okay, so if it's the end of each unit in each of the subjects, then I think you can focus on what is taught within the unit. You need to focus on what is taught within the unit alone. So I know you want students to be able to integrate it, but because you've not. So for example, in a physics unit, if you're teaching physics in terms of, also for example, say chemistry, you're teaching in terms of atomic structure,
right?
But the physics concept of atomic structure comes later. You can't include it in the chemistry one yet.
Correct.
But when you're assessing the physics one, then you can include the chemistry one because it has already been taught.
Okay. So you have to map the units in such a way that you are integrate the questions.
Yes, because it's integrated sciences. The aim is to make sure students understand that the sciences are one. Everything is actually integrated. So you need to make sure that you're also teaching in that manner. So when the teacher teaches physics in terms of radioactive decay, which uses the concept of atomic structure, which is done in chemistry, you need to make sure, because you're using different teachers, you need to make sure that that teacher is reiterating the atomic structure concepts from chemistry from the chemistry teacher.
Okay. Yeah, in case of biology, like if we are not able to integrate, then how do we go about? Sir?
Okay. So technically, everything should be integrated at least with one other science. So I think it's important that that's why I like chemistry a lot, because it's the central science. So every concept in biology technically has got the understanding of a chemistry understanding. So maybe because biology is seen as the application of chemistry, chemistry is seen as the application of physics, and physics is seen as the application of maths, right? Maybe it's a bit more valid to teach it in that order. So maybe when you always teach biology after chemistry, and you make sure that you're making that link. So for example, when you're doing osmosis in biology, diffusion in biology, students must have done molar masses, must have done diffusion in chemistry to know that the rate of diffusion is actually due to the difference in molar mass or intermolecular forces, So I think as teachers, because you're working as a team, you need that collaboration time to make sure that when you're mapping your whole year, that is integration.
Okay. So when we prepare the units also, should it be separate unit for physics, chemistry, bio, or we have to have one unit where all these topics are taught?
Okay, so my school, again, only speaking from this 1 year of experience, we only do MYP 1, 2, and 3, where the sciences are not separated. So the first 3 years, so it's not separated. So we do a unit as a unit of inquiry. So, for example, like one of our MYP 3 unit is how do we go to Mars, or how do we get to Mars? So in that unit on how to go to Mars, we're teaching them about speed, we're teaching them about solar system, velocity, and then the chemistry bit, we're teaching them about fossil fuel, how do we power our rockets, and all those kind of things. And then in the biology, we're teaching them about nutrition, of how an astronaut should be, what should an astronaut be eating, things like that. So I feel that way the students can see all the 3 sciences within that one unit of inquiry.
So for 1, 2, 3, it's fine, sir. When we go to MYP 4, because little more depth we have to teach, they're only finding it difficult. 1, 2, 3, absolutely. You said we are practicing.
Yeah, I do understand. So I've got no experience in MYP 4 and 5 because we don't do it, and because we do the Cambridge IGCSE. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, sir. That wonderful session. I think we can connect about IBDP chemistry. I'm a chemistry facilitator, sir.
Okay, all right.
So I just want to pitch in here. I have taught the coordinated sciences 0654. So whoever is this person, iPhone, I don't know your name. So
I'm Padma. Ashika ma'am, good evening. I'm Padmaja from Gaudium.
Hi, Padmaja. So I think you should have a look at the coordinated science curriculum, okay? Or maybe put into the chat GPT saying that these are the topics, okay? How do I integrate, or which topics can I teach together so that I can create an integrated unit for MYP?
Thank you.
You can do it that way.
Yeah. Just to add on from Ashika, our school also does coordinated. So coordinated, sometimes the sciences are a bit split. Cambridge has got another one called combined science.
Yes.
So combined science is maybe the one you should be looking out for, and also coordinated science, because we do coordinated as well.
Okay, thank you, sir, for that.
Okay.
Thank you,
I'm sorry.
sir.
Thank you. I know a few people put up their hands. It's missing now. How do I find out who you are?
We will just take up last 2 questions because it is
okay.
only
All right.
2 minutes.
I know. Okay.
So we will just take up last 2 questions. One from Stella.
Okay.
For MYP integrated sciences, if we plan a summative assessment after all 6 units, then for how many marks we should plan the assessment?
Okay, so actually it depends on the style of assessment and the time given to the students. So for example, I would ask you, is it going to be a test assessment, or is it going to be a project, or how is it usually you do after 6 units?
Stella, if you are here, you can unmute. I think she's there. Stella, if you're here, yes.
Okay, so what kind of assessment are you doing after these 6 units?
Hello, Stella. I can see she's there. Can you please unmute yourself?
Oh, okay. So
okay, if she's not there,
okay.
We can go
all
to
right.
the next.
So a generalized answer for me, since you didn't say. Okay. So if it's a project-based one, it should be based on the descriptor of the rubrics that you've given the students, and it also depends on the number of days or number of lessons you've given the students to actually do it. I would assume if it's going to be a test-based, it should be done within that period or within that day itself. So if yours is 1 hour, and if you're gonna actually assess all 6 units in 1 hour, I think that, coming from experience, personally, I feel it's a bit not very, very practical. Okay, so maybe you need to look at how frequent you break up your assessments rather than doing one at the end of the 6 units. Thank you.
Okay, I guess the last one will take it from Pandit, who is waiting from long time by raising his hand. So yes, please unmute and ask, and then we wrap up the session.
All right, sorry for waiting, Pandit. carry on.
Hey, Harry.
Yes.
Oh, no. Mine is appreciation. Quite an informative session. I thank you so much because I've gained a lot over the 1 or so hours. Thank you so much for sharing, and I'm looking
Thank
forward
you.
to practicing all these things. Thank you. Thank you, Classcipe.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
That's awesome. I think
Yeah,
that's it then.
thank you so much, Hari. I need your contact number.
Yes. I just stopped
You can
sharing.
contact
Okay.
on LinkedIn, I think. You can contact on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have connected to him.
I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I just wanted to clarify that I'm not an expert. We are all students who are also teachers, and it's good practice that we share what we've done well and how we can improve, because again, it's good to share what didn't work in your class, because what didn't work in your class could work in mine, so and I think it's this whole sharing community is what I love with what Classcipe is actually doing here. And thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.